Okay, try to picture this. A country completely on its knees. The stock market has totally crashed, banks are shuttering their doors left and right, and literally millions of people are out of work. This was the reality for the United States during the Great Depression. And the government's response? Well, it would become one of the most ambitious, controversial, and frankly transformative periods in all of American history. President Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal.
So here's what we're going to break down. We'll start with the crisis that sparked the whole thing, then jump into the programs the New Deal actually unleashed. After that, we'll look at the lasting changes and the major criticisms, and finally, get into why people still argue about its legacy today.
First things first, we have to get a handle on just how dire the situation really was. I mean, this wasn't some minor recession. This was a complete and total economic collapse that was threatening the very fabric of the nation. At its absolute worst, the unemployment rate hit 25%. Let that sink in. 1 out of every 4 people in the workforce had no job. Just imagine that. In cities and towns all across America, you had bread lines and soup lines that stretched for blocks. A real sense of hopelessness was just setting in everywhere.
It was just a brutal domino effect. Manufacturing completely tanked. Almost 40% of the nation's banks failed, taking people's entire life savings down with them. And prices fell, which might sound good, but it created this crippling deflation that made it impossible for anyone to repay their debts. And here's the real kicker. There was no safety net. None. If you lost your job and your savings, you were completely on your own.
And right into all this despair steps Franklin D. Roosevelt. In 1932, he makes this promise. And look, this wasn't just some slick political slogan. It was a pledge of direct, forceful government action. For millions of Americans, it was the first real glimmer of hope they had seen in years.
So what did this New Deal actually look like in practice? Well, here's the thing. It wasn't some single, perfectly worked out plan. It was more like a series of bold, sometimes even contradictory experiments in government intervention. They were basically trying everything. And the speed was just breathtaking. In his first 100 days, FDR and Congress just pushed through this incredible wave of legislation. They declared a national bank holiday to stop the panic, they created the Civilian Conservation Corps to put young men to work, and they started sending direct relief funds to the states. The goal was simple: action and action now. This whole period gave birth to what people started calling the alphabet soup of agencies. You had the WPA, the CCC, the TVA, the NRA. These weren't just acronyms. They represented a massive, unprecedented expansion of the federal government, with each agency designed to tackle a different piece of the crisis. Let's just take one, the WPA, the Works Progress Administration. This thing became the largest single employer in the entire country. And it didn't just hand out paychecks, it totally transformed America's physical landscape. It built the roads, schools, and parks that so many of us still use today. It even hired artists, writers, and musicians to create public art. Now, it's pretty helpful to think of the New Deal as having 2 distinct phases. The first New Deal was kind of like emergency medicine, just stop the bleeding. But the second New Deal, which kicked off around 1935, was all about long-term health. It was focused on building a more stable and secure society with programs that were designed to last. And this brings us to the New Deal's really profound legacy, because it didn't just respond to a crisis. It fundamentally reshaped the entire relationship between the American people and their government, for better and, as we'll see, for worse. If you want the perfect example of this massive shift, look no further than the Social Security Act of 1935. This was, and still is, arguably the single most significant piece of legislation from that whole era. For the very first time, it created a permanent national safety net for retirement, unemployment, and disability. It was built on 3 core pillars: retirement pensions for older folks, unemployment insurance for people who lost their jobs, and financial aid for the most vulnerable. This was a completely radical idea at the time, but it became a cornerstone of American society. It really changed what the government's promise to its citizens was all about. But here's where we have to ask a really critical question. As all of these massive programs were getting rolled out, did they actually benefit everyone equally? Well, the answer, unfortunately, is a clear no. The hard truth is that many New Deal programs either ignored or, in some cases, actively harmed African Americans. Farm aid often didn't make it to Black sharecroppers. The NRA's wage codes actually led to 500,000 Black workers getting fired. Federal housing policies locked in segregation through the practice of redlining. And even the CCC relief camps ended up being segregated. So while it was building a new safety net, the New Deal was also reinforcing the country's existing racial hierarchy.
And all of this brings us to our final section, the enduring debate. Because decades later, historians and economists are still arguing fiercely over whether the New Deal was ultimately a success.
The whole debate really boils down to two opposing viewpoints. On one side, supporters argue that the New Deal literally saved capitalism, restored people's faith in democracy, and built a safety net that we still rely on today. But on the other side, critics will tell you that it exploded the national debt, created a massive, inefficient bureaucracy, and get this, some economists argue it actually made the Depression last longer by messing with the free market.
And the data does show one of the critics' main points pretty clearly. While unemployment did fall from that horrifying peak in 1933, it stayed stubbornly high all through the 1930s. As you can see right here, the country didn't really get back to full employment until the massive industrial mobilization for World War II kicked in. The economic debate is just as split. For instance, Keynesians, they're the folks who believe government spending can jumpstart an economy, they say the New Deal was on the right track, but just didn't spend nearly enough money. Then you have monetarists who say its real success was fixing the banking system, which let the economy heal itself. With all these conflicting views, there's just no easy consensus.
But here is the one thing that pretty much everyone agrees on. The New Deal permanently and dramatically expanded the power and responsibility of the federal government. It created the expectation that in a time of national crisis, Washington is supposed to step in. That right there was its most undeniable and maybe its most important legacy. So after all of this, we're left with the big question, aren't we? Was the New Deal a bold rescue that saved the country from total collapse? Was it a harmful experiment that maybe created as many problems as it solved? Or, like most huge things in history, was it something way more complicated, somewhere there in the middle? That's the debate that continues to shape America to this day.